If he really wants this war to end, he should impose these sanctions, and for him to create these weird conditions so he doesn't have to, I think tells you more than anything else.
So right now, right from the start of the Trump presidency, if you'd asked the question, whose side is Donald Trump on in the war between Russia and Ukraine, the answer was Russia. The humiliation of the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky in the Oval Office in February confirmed it. But it looks like that relationship is over. Yesterday at the UN, Trump praised Zelensky and suggested Ukraine could win back all the territory it's lost since the Russian invasion. So how will Vladimir Putin react to the latest shift in Trump's policy? Bill Browder, high-profile Kremlin critic and author of Red Notice, How I Became Putin's Number One Enemy, is with us. Good afternoon, Bill.
Good afternoon to you.
Look, we all tend to get very excited about everything that Donald Trump says on any given day because we know he might say exactly the opposite the following day. But what do you think Vladimir Putin will have heard yesterday, and will it matter to him?
Well, I think we shouldn't get too excited about what happened with Donald Trump yesterday, because Donald Trump has flip-flopped a number of times in terms of either being on Putin's side verbally or being on Zelensky's side verbally. I can remember, I think it was a day after he was inaugurated, he issued a Truth Social post in which he said that if Putin doesn't come to the negotiating table, there's going to be tariffs, taxes, and sanctions. And then, of course, here we are now, many months into his presidency, and there's none of that against Putin. And so Trump flip-flops around on all this stuff, and Putin has seen him flip-flopping around. And probably most importantly, Trump made this ultimatum before the summit in Alaska, in Anchorage, where if Putin didn't stop the war in Ukraine, then Trump was gonna go hard on Putin. And of course, the red carpet was rolled out. There was no ceasefire, and there was no reaction. So what does Putin think? Putin says to himself, I don't think this guy is serious. I don't think he's going to do anything. And he can say whatever he wants, whenever he wants. It doesn't matter. All that matters are actions, not words.
Well, speaking of action, Mr. Trump did say that NATO, or imply, I should say, NATO countries should shoot down Russian planes that enter their airspace. Do you think that might worry the Russians, that it might actually happen as they're doing their probing of NATO airspace?
Well, certainly it's terrible that Russia is probing NATO airspace. They're sending drones into Poland. They're sending jets into Estonia. But whatever Trump says or doesn't say, it would be a decision of various allies. And I don't think that Trump is saying that America is going to shoot down Russian jets. He's saying, yeah, the Europeans can basically shoot down Russian jets. And so then the question is, do the Europeans want to shoot down Russian jets? And the answer is probably they would only do so if they felt protected in the NATO umbrella with America on their side. And so I think we're still where we were before. I think everyone is getting way too excited about this statement. And in fact, if you watched Trump making the statement, it didn't sound like he was making it with high conviction. It sounded like he was just pulling it out of thin air, basically off the top of his head at that moment, based on whatever feelings he had after meeting with Zelensky. I don't think that this is a well thought through policy that changes the way America is. I would be very happy if I'm wrong, and that Trump has changed policy. That would be a great thing for Ukraine, a great thing for Europe, and a great thing for the world. But I think we're a long way away from that. And I think this is just one of his verbal flip-flops that will probably come on the other side in a couple of days.
Well, I know that there are objective forces, the economy and security and so on, that compel decisions by senior leaders like Putin and Donald Trump. And I'm myself always a bit reluctant to attribute these people's actions to some sort of personal psychology or something that happened to them in their childhood. But there is clearly some evidence that both men are a bit thin-skinned. They do respond to insults. And I wonder if when Trump said this actually today on Truth Social, that Russia has been fighting aimlessly for 3.5 years. a war that should have taken a real military power, thereby implying that Russia isn't a real military power, less than a week to win, it makes them look like a paper tiger. Do you think that's going to sting a bit for Mr. Putin?
Well, I think it certainly will. To have the most powerful man in the free world denigrate you like that is not very nice. But again, memories are short. Trump says all sorts of things. He changes his mind. He goes back and forth. And so if this was a statement made by any other head of state, I think that would be extremely provocative towards Putin, because any other head of state would have made a statement like that only after careful consideration, and then that would be the policy. With Trump, he just shifts his views so regularly, and particularly about this war, that Putin is a pragmatist ultimately, and he's going to say to himself, okay, Trump said this stuff, that's sort of insulting, but let's just give it a couple days, and probably he'll say something nice about me, because that is sort of what's been happening since Trump came back into power.
The thing that, if I may just finally ask you this, Bill, the thing that Trump has said, which I think may have more force, is that Russia's in big economic trouble. Of course, the Russians have been able to sell oil. And there are two things that Trump has said. Europeans need to stop buying it. And secondly, more sanctions, more sanctions, more sanctions. Do you think that's where the real pressure might come?
Absolutely. That is the crux. If the West, led by the United States, were to cut off Russia's capacity to sell their oil, Russia would run out of money, and they wouldn't be able to fight this war anymore. Having said that, I just want to point out very importantly that Trump is putting this weird fake condition on doing these sanctions. He's saying that Europeans are buying the oil. The Europeans who are buying the oil are like Hungary and Slovakia. These are tiny little countries, de minimis amounts of oil. These are actually allies, at least in the case of Hungary. Viktor Orban is an ally of Donald Trump. And so I think he's putting that out there to say, I would do something, but I can't because Europe is not behaving, when in fact Europe is pretty much not buying Russian oil. And there's one or two tiny little countries that are sort of almost not cooperating with the free world. And so therefore Trump doesn't have to do these sanctions, which he still hasn't done. I mean, if he really wants this war to end, he should impose these sanctions, and for him to create these weird conditions so he doesn't have to, I think tells you more than anything else.
So in summary, Bill, pretty much as you were today.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I would say that if we want to project out 2 weeks, you're not going to see any major shift in geopolitics towards Russia. The war will continue. America will continue not to impose costs on Putin, and it'll be our business to support Ukraine as we've been doing.
Bill, thank you so much. That was Bill Browder, the high-profile Kremlin critic, the author of Red Notice: How I Became Putin's #1 Enemy.
Ukraine's President Zelensky will address the United Nations today after Donald Trump said that Kyiv can win all of Ukraine back in its original form. Donald Trump also said NATO should be ready to shoot down Russian planes entering its airspace. The Foreign Secretary, Yvette Cooper, spoke to the UN.
We stand ready to take all steps necessary to defend NATO's skies and NATO's territory. We are vigilant and we are resolute. And if we need to confront planes that are operating in NATO airspace without permission, then we will do so. The United Kingdom stands by our friends.
Well, Jimmy Rushton is a security analyst in Ukraine and joins me now. Hello, Jimmy.
Hello.
Look, this is a notable shift in position from Donald Trump. What does it mean for Ukraine? Will it translate into action?
I think it's the result of 6 months of very careful and sometimes painstaking diplomacy from the Ukrainians. Again, 6 months ago, we had that incredible blow up in the Oval Office and shouting matches. And now we've got Trump and Zelensky standing side by side, big grins, thumbs up, and Trump making this extraordinary declaration that Ukraine can retake all of its territory, going to the 1991 borders, which would include Crimea. So, yeah, it's always difficult to know exactly when Trump is going to change his mind. And I would say take what he says with a pinch of salt, but it's definitely positive for Ukraine.
Do you think that this rebuilt relationship. Is that an achievement for Zelensky, or is that more to do with Vladimir Putin's actions in just sort of rebuffing everything that Donald Trump wants him to do?
I think it's both. I think you also have to credit European leaders for engaging in this kind of transatlantic diplomacy. We obviously had that meeting where you had multiple European leaders, including Keir Starmer and others in the White House, and they were very persuasive actually with Trump. So I think it's both. Putin has, I think, overplayed his cards. He's been very intransigent, and he hasn't really he hasn't been willing to give up anything really. They're still sticking to their maximalist demands that they want all these regions to be Ukraine, which they've annexed, which they've put into the Russian constitution, and they're not willing to meet the Americans even slightly in that regard.
There aren't a lot of people who think that Ukraine can win back all of Crimea. One often wonders if Ukraine even thinks that it can win back all of Crimea. Do you think Donald Trump thinks it can, or is this just what he's saying in order to sort of try and move the dial with the sort of maximalist rhetoric on every side whenever he says anything?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's really difficult to say. I think, for example, if we looked at Syria a year ago, nobody would have thought that Assad's regime would have crumbled. And in war, in conflict, sometimes things happen very, very quickly. And I think if you look into the future, it's difficult at the moment to envision a scenario where Ukraine could militarily take back Crimea, for example. But it's not impossible. And there's a current Ukrainian campaign, a very successful Ukrainian campaign of degrading Russian air defenses in Crimea. They're striking radars, surface-to-air missile launchers with small drones, and they're doing that very effectively. They've beaten the Black Sea Fleet out of the Black Sea, and it's basically remaining in harbour now with their maritime drones. So they have significant military successes, and I don't think we should rule anything out, to be honest.
Trump's remarks that NATO should shoot down Russian planes if they cross the border, across any of the borders. One would have thought that a lot of NATO countries are going to be reluctant to do that if they're not confident of American support if they do. There's no promise here of any kind of American military support if that happens, is there?
There's not, unfortunately, and that is very unfortunate, especially for the smaller countries, Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia. They don't have air forces of their own, excuse me, and they don't have sophisticated surface-to-air missile launchers in most cases, so they would rely on external support to shoot down these aircraft. I think it's the right posture to have towards Russia, because I think it's quite dangerous to allow these incursions to continue, because, for example, if we give the Russians the impression that we're not going to defend the airspace over NATO countries, they might get the mistaken impression that we're not prepared to defend the territories of these NATO countries, and Russia might think that they can try something in Estonia on the ground. So I think we have to be decisive in defending these countries, and I think it's the right statement to be making, even if it's not entirely backed up with actions at the moment.
Security analyst Jimmy Rushton, thanks very much indeed. Good to speak to you.